Thank you all very much for coming out on this wonderful afternoon. We are beginning a new tradition in our College of Computer, Mathematical, and Natural Sciences. My name is Jayant Banavar. I'm the Dean of the college. And what we hope to do is to have more talks like today once in a while, and these talks would be of great interest to our whole community. And so to kick off this series, we have an absolutely terrific speaker. He's somebody that I met for the first time a few months ago. I had, of course, known of him for many years before that. He is a household name for all of us scientists. He is Alan Leshner, and Alan is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and he's the executive publisher of the journal Science that we all read and that we all hope to get published in. And Alan has had a tremendous career in public service and in science. He was the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse at the National Institutes of Health. He was also the acting director of the National Institute for Mental Health. He has served in many capacities in the National Science Foundation. And actually, his public service began after a stint as a professor of biology at Bucknell University. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's on the governing council of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies of Science. As you can see, the list is going on and on. President Bush appointed him to the National Science Board in 2004, and President Barack Obama reappointed him in 2011. And truly speaking, it's not an exaggeration that the world we live in, which is really shaped a lot by science, is something that Alan has influenced in a very positive way over the years. He has been very giving, very selfless, and he has made a true difference in the lives of so many of us in this country and beyond. He is also has a very nice title. He's named one of the nifty 50 speakers in USA Science and Engineering's festival. And in this capacity, he does tremendous service by going to middle schools and high schools and talking to the students there and inspiring those people there. And he is really a very strong proponent of science curricula. He cares deeply about STEM education. He cares about the well-being of our nation. And he has a title that he's going to talk about, which seems to be evolving rather rapidly. So he sent in a title and an abstract, and now the title has changed. And I don't want to tell you what the new title is, because by the time he comes here, it might have changed again. And so what I want you all to do is to extend a very hearty welcome to one of the nifty 50, a true friend of our college and our university, Alan Leshner.
I like that. That was terrific. I'm only sorry my parents weren't here. As they say, my father would have been impressed, my mother would have believed it. So I actually did change the title of this talk and the talk. So those of you who have come for some deep insights around STEM education, I'm sorry. I'll mention it, but what I'm more obsessed with these days, actually, is this broader sense of context within which the scientific enterprise is now embedded. both in the United States and abroad. And one of the issues is, of course, science education, and we can talk about it. I'll try to talk fast enough that we have time if you want to hear my shtick on science education as well. But as I was thinking about it actually this morning, I decided this is a better talk. So please indulge me. Okay. Thank you for your understanding. So there's an old saying, and this is just to give you an example of how poorly I was actually trained classically. So I went to an unnamed small liberal arts college. When I was at NIH, I used to say, as Shakespeare would say, you know, we're living in the best of times and the worst of times. And I gave out $1 billion a year. When you give out $1 billion a year, you are the smartest person in the room. The minute I left NIH and no longer had any money, somebody corrected it. So the core contextual point is that we are, in fact, living in the best of times and the worst of times. On the one hand, we are, in fact, living in the best of scientific times. Advances in science are coming at a phenomenal rate. Some of it is what we call incremental advance, building on earlier discoveries and accomplishments. Some of it is the advent of new technologies that enable entirely new kinds of questions to be asked. And although I think by now we hate the expression paradigm changing, they're what most of us were taught were paradigm changing. And in fact, they enable new questions. The other thing that's happening that I particularly like is what we used to call high-risk, high-payoff research, now is euphemistically called transformative research. What that means is that somebody's research project is so novel, so innovative that they can't get funded. And so somebody finally says, what a great idea, let's take a chance. Well, you're not allowed in the government to do anything risky, right? The Congress won't allow you. And therefore, you do a transformative thing. But that's what it means. And that category of research that's so critical to scientific advance, and I would argue to innovation more broadly, in fact, is finally getting recognized and getting some support. So that's good. And of course, science and technology have never been more important to modern life. As a gift, I won't go through all of these, but this is a compilation of the major issues facing global society. And the point of it is that there isn't an issue of modern life that doesn't have a science component to it, either as a cause or as a cure. And that means science is embedded in everything. The consequence of that is in order for people to thrive in the modern world, they have to have a fundamental comfort and familiarity with science and technology, or they will be stragglers in the modern age. And this actually is what my whole STEM talk that's in my briefcase was about. The need to educate all students, not just to educate the future scientists and engineers. The reason that that turns into sort of a shtick or a mantra is that what I've learned is everybody agrees with that point. They agree with that point for 6 minutes. The 7th minute, they realize how hard it is to give everybody enough of an education in science, engineering, mathematics, and technology in order to enable them to thrive in the modern world. And they switch from educating all students to educating the next generation of scientists and engineers. And I would love to argue that out later, but let me tell you, they're wrong, we're right. This is the point. In addition to that, more and more countries have realized that in order to thrive in the modern world, they too have to have science capacity. And therefore, they are investing at increasing rates in science to build that capacity because they have realized the correlation is very simple. The stronger your scientific enterprise, the stronger your economy, the better the health of your people, etc. Now, that is a correlation. I am a scientist. I understand that's not necessarily causation, but let us not tell the policymakers because they're investing more and more in science, and that's good. The obverse is also true, that in order for science to prosper, the overall relationship between science and the rest of society has to be strong, and I'll come back to each of those. So that was the good time. Did you like that? I made that myself. And you did not. I have a couple of these, and there will be a test, whether you are smart enough to notice them. You like that? Turbulence, get it? I knew this wasn't the engineering group. So, I know, I don't know how to do that. I'm a limited person, as you know. Okay, you get the point. At the same time, things are going really well. Things are also not going so well. And there are a variety of forces that are converging to make the broad climate for science not as good as we'd like. Some of them, and I do want to dwell a little bit on this, some of those forces or factors are internal to the science enterprise, and they are things that we of the enterprise need to pay attention to. Again, I won't go through these in detail. You can read as well as I, but any of those individual items, serious or only apparently serious as they may be, has the very dramatic effect of tarnishing the entire scientific enterprise and therefore decreasing the credibility of science and decreasing its ability to actually have the impacts on the rest of society that we in the community think it ought to have. So some of them are more or less widely known. In the last year or so, we've had many more instances, for example, of papers being retracted from scientific journals. Given the gazillion articles that are published every year, it seems like a very small number are being retracted only because it's a mistake, or worse, it's a fabrication. Well, the truth is, those individual incidents get magnified because they're what gets reported in the press. The entire enterprise is tarnished. Conflict of interest is my favorite example, or my least favorite example. NIH, 5,000 scientists, had 5 scientists commit fairly heinous acts of conflict of interest, almost brought the agency down. 5 out of 5,000. So you can't say it's only a couple, it's a rare event, it doesn't really matter. These are issues within the scientific community, and I would argue they're issues that we have to attend to and keep our own house in order. There are, of course, external pressures as well. You can read as well as I. Not all are bad, but they shouldn't be ignored. So one that's happening is that science as an enterprise, this is a very important trend, is becoming more global in character, and it's actually threatening America's preeminence. In fact, I'm fond of saying the United States is no longer preeminent in science. It's not the best in every field, by far, and it's certainly not the best in all fields. And we are still among the eminent scientific communities, but you only have to go to Europe in order to discover that there are very strong scientific enterprises, many of which in specific domains do better than we do. That's for the sake of the nationalists in the country. And some of that is because so many more countries have had that realization I referred to. If I wander, can you still hear me? I'll yell. So many countries have realized that science is good for them. And actually, for a while, I was counting countries where I was in the presence either of a science minister or the head of state when he or she said, science is good for innovation, innovation is good for the economy, we're going to take over the world, we're going to invest in science. You know, we're going to build the country on its brains. And I had collected 27 countries at that point, and they ranged from countries like the United States or China, India that we all know about, to countries like Rwanda, which is trying to build its country, its economy on its brains. I like this. This is just to illustrate that countries are investing more and more, although the United States has gone up substantially. Others are investing tremendously. You may be aware that the European Commission is just now arguing out whether they'll only spend 70 billion euros or 80 billion euros on the new Horizon 2020 program. It is directly an attempt to build scientific capacity in Europe in order to make the European Union a more competitive enterprise. Europe has been out-publishing the United States at least since the mid-late 1990s. Now, that's number of papers. That's not necessarily quality of papers. American papers are, in fact, cited more than European papers. But you can see U.S. is not exclusive in the same way. Now, my good friend Subra Suresh has this line that I love. If you remember nothing else, this is a great line. He loves acronyms. Have you ever noticed, those of you in science, that the National Science Foundation now is like obsessed with acronyms? It's obsessed with acronyms that have English language meaning. I have no idea what they mean, but they sound great. Anyway, his line, good science anywhere is good for science everywhere. So if you run a global scientific society, as I do, those data that I just showed you are terrific. If you worry about the position of the United States, our eminence is even being threatened by the investments and activities elsewhere. I said that already. So the biggest external factor, of course, is always funding. And I have too many funding slides because I couldn't figure out which ones to take out. I'll do them quickly, but I want to give you a sense of what's been happening with American funding for science, including in the last few days. The biggest issue... Thank you. The biggest issue has been the sequester. So this chart, a little bit hard to follow, relates to something called the America Competes Act, which has been passed multiple times, but the intent of the American Competes Act was to build particularly physical science capability as a way to build the economy and innovation. That bluish-grayish line was the projection of where it was supposed to go. Where it actually looked like it's been going is that gray and then dark blue line, and then you can see what the sequester did. Not good. This is, in constant dollars, the path of funding in the United States over the course of the last decades, right? You can see this is by agency, and we don't have to do that in detail. A lot of that, by the way, that increase was the doubling of NIH. That's the red lines, and if you look carefully, you'll see that doubling has fundamentally been taken apart over the course of the last few years. But you can see what's happened to overall R&D funding in the United States. And what we had was a healthy increase, followed by last few years, some serious decreases. That's what sequester did. Just look at all them red lines. I don't want to take the time to go through it in detail, but that's actually the percentage change agency by agency as a sort of final result for this fiscal year. All you need to notice is there are very few, and in fact, Homeland Security that has that large increase is a tiny agency. Commerce is pretty much NOAA. But then if you look at the major agencies, they've all had major decreases in this fiscal year. I put this in. Is this boring? Is the money part boring? No. I got a lot of other stuff. So, but I find this very interesting, and not to depress you after lunch, but this, so I'll stop with the money in a minute. But this is just to show you, so this is what the sequester does. Takes away that much money. Over 5 years, it'll remove that much money, the next column. And the important thing is to look at the agency on the left, and you will see that their budget for 2013 is the lowest since that year. So while the rest of the world is increasing its investment in science and technology, the United States has actually been decreasing its funding for science. It does not sound smart. This is the president's 2014 budget, which actually is quite encouraging. It's the 2014 budget after sequestration and in constant dollars, so agencies like NIH that actually get a little bit of an increase look like they get a decrease. But what you're seeing is an attempt by the administration to begin to counteract the effect of the sequester and actually invest more in science. So it is a cause, I would say, for hope. Where it will end up, nobody has any idea. But the fact is, we are once again trying to rebuild the science enterprise. Okay, that's real dollars. Remember how I said it's left and right? Yeah, okay. This is a line just we in the science advocacy community, you know, we used to all say, oh, we doubled the NIH budget in 5 years. Okay, we were thrilled then later when money got tight, we said, we'll double the NSF budget in 10 years. Now we're all ecstatic if it's flat, right? So it's called flat's the new doubling. There's another problem I just want to mention, and that actually is something called the regulatory burden. And there's something called the Federal Demonstration Project that's a partnership between some federal agencies, but many academic institutions. They did a survey about life as an American researcher. And what they discovered was in 2007, actually the study was done a little before, published in 2007, 42% of an American researcher's research time, that's not life or work time, research time is spent on administrative stuff, either from the government or universities. Universities are guilty themselves. Well, they just came out with the survey again after a lot of Sturmendrang and hysteria, people's reaction, and what do you think the number is? 42%. Progress. Okay. The issue is supposedly getting more attention. I'm a member of a task force, the National Science Board, looking at this issue. It has been looked at by many people, and some steps have been taken, but I think it's a shame for the neighbors. If you think about the waste of researchers spending 42% of their research time on administrative stuff, probably not the best investments. Another category of issues has to do with the pipeline. Do we have enough new scientists coming along? The young investigator pool has now become sort of a euphemism. There is no such thing as young investigators. I am of an era when you could get your first grant when you were 25 years old. The average age of the first grant at the National Institutes of Health or from the National Institutes of Health is 42. NSF is a whole lot better, it's 36. Think about what that does to the willingness of the best and brightest to go into our enterprise. Obviously, I think it's because of that. This is just to show you the aging of the investigator group, and I apologize, I think I put too many charts into this talk, but this will inspire you. So the average age, by age group, this is the percentage at NIH. So you see that red line? That's old folks getting more grants. The blue line, young folks getting less grants. We don't like that. That's the age number that I made reference to. Notice how it creeped up over time. So what do you do about it? And that's the tough question. My solution is simple. I once wrote an editorial in Science that was called Just Give Them Grants. You know, if you want people to get started in science, you have to enable them to do it. And you can't do it if you make them have 3 postdocs first, and then nobody needs 3 postdocs, even in behavioral neuroendocrinology, my own field. You don't need them. What you need is a grant to get started, and we could do it. Once the country makes a decision that you want to take care of young scientists and build their careers, give them the grants. And in fact, some of that has been done. It's been done through the variety of these programs. And this is a chart after NIH. Just look at that green line, right? That was the success for new investigators after NIH decided to just lower the pay line and give more grants to young investigators. It actually worked. Not rocket science. You can actually do it. Okay. These are all issues that are internal or parochial. to the science community, and there are things we could do something about. But what I really wanted to talk about, and what I want to talk about for the remainder of my time, is what you might think of as the external factors, because the truth is that more importantly than that there are problems internal to science is that our relationship, I'm going to do that again because you didn't do it, our broader relationship, thank you, is weak. And that's what I'd like to talk about now. You holding up okay? I'm talking a lot of slides, fast, but loud. Loud keeps you awake. That's good. This is the most important thing I will say. It's a quote from Abraham Lincoln, and it actually is something that every scientist, every academic needs to understand. What is all of this about? It's about serving society. It is about meeting society's needs and solving global scientific problems. And therefore, you have to have a receptive public, a public that understands and wants the kind of help you're going to give them. And this is a quote from Abraham Lincoln in another context, but it certainly applies here. Now, every time I start to talk about there being some rockiness to the science-society relationship, somebody says, but people love scientists. And you know, generally it's true. This is the prestige of various professions, and it's hard to read the bottom, I'm sorry. Scientists are the second bar on the left. They are second most prestigious behind firefighters. They are ahead of doctors, and just, I want to point out, lawyers down that other end, from the end. That has nothing to do with any members of my family. But it's true, scientists have high prestige, and when asked, have the benefits of science outweighed the negative effects? Forever, red line, 70 to 90% of the population says yes. So yes, people think science is good. The problem is they have no idea what it is, and they have no idea what it isn't. This is back to that educate everybody point. 60% of Americans believe in extrasensory perception. I used to be, I'm technically a psychologist by background. When I was working at the National Science Foundation, I was designated the official contact for the paranormal parapsychology community. I had misbehaved, and that was the reward. And let me tell you, I have seen Uri Geller bend spoons and do stuff, and then somebody caught the shill in the audience while I was there. It was fabulous. Anyway, 47% of the population don't believe in evolution. 51% think astrology is scientific. That's not the one looking at the stars. The tension that I think is going on can come about from a variety of factors. So I mentioned the tarnished image of science, and that has been a big issue. Don't underestimate it. There's misunderstanding that occurs and differs from country to country. So vaccines and autism is a fabulous example. One of the biggest scientific frauds of all time meant that millions of children were not vaccinated because their parents believed that an ingredient in the vaccines caused autism. It doesn't. Genetically modified foods is another variable, not so much in the United States as it is in Europe. So other issues are contentious because they're inconvenient. Climate change. People's objection to climate change is not that the summer's warm or not. They're not really arguing that. They're arguing what you would do about it and how would you pay for it. What could you do in order to counteract it? Then there's a set of things that I call conflict with core human values or beliefs. And these are the toughest issues that I think are the hardest for the scientific enterprise to deal with in its relationship with the rest of society. So I've been collecting issues. Some are more obvious than others. Embryonic stem cell research. This is not an issue of scientific fact or scientific credibility. When you do a survey The majority of the American population understands that embryonic stem cell research can and likely will lead to new diagnostics and therapeutics. Their objection has to do with when they believe life begins. So it's actually an almost religious difference, or religious. It's not a scientific question when life begins. Science can't answer that question. So the difference is a value difference, not a scientific difference. Evolution, teaching evolution in the schools. Why do people object to it? Not because they didn't go to school themselves and didn't get evolution beaten into them. They object to it because the concept of evolution conflicts with a literal interpretation of the creation story. Origins of the universe ties to that. So you heard it here first, synthetic biology. When people think about what the implications are of being able to make a little ear with 3D printing or do something synthetically, when they realize you might ultimately get a synthetic person, they may not like that so much. Neuroscience, my own field, is one where we're already starting to see issues, but we absolutely will see issues. For example, I come out of the mental health and addiction business, and when people realize what it means that we have come to understand that you don't have a separate mind and body, right? That your mind is actually an emergent property of the clicky-clickies going on inside that hard thing on top of your shoulders, they're not going to like it, because what does it mean about yourself, right? So the concept of self is not really a scientific concept. Or your soul. Well, if you don't have a separate mind and body, is your soul floating around there outside, you know? People aren't going to like it, and I can tell you that the same people who object to evolution have made a statement condemning mental materialism. That means what I just said, mind, body, stuff. Okay. The problem in this interaction with the public is that only we are stuck with what science says. The public and policymakers are free to either ignore, distort, deny what science is showing with relatively little immediate consequence or real consequence. So if I say something untrue based in science, my credibility is gone, the scientific community will, hang me by my thumbs, and I'm useless to the scientific community. But an ideologue can say whatever he or she wants with relatively little consequence. And in fact, I have a mantra, another one of my innumerables, that says, never debate an ideologue. And during intelligent design and evolution, I actually got caught doing it once, which was a big mistake. And you should never do it, because they can make stuff up. They make stuff up, it hasn't got any consequence. So I told this story recently at an awards dinner. So I was on the Diane Rehm show. I'm the evolution guy, in case you were wondering. There was another person who was the intelligent design person, a man. And he's on the phone making stuff up. And I'm finding ways to say you're lying, right, in many different ways. And finally there was a break. And Diane Rehm said to me, stop calling him a liar. You're killing your own credibility. There's a limited number of times you can call somebody else a liar before you get tarnished. She was right, because I've done a lot of radio, take my word for it. And I stopped doing it, and things went better at that point. But my point is that only we are stuck with it. A corollary is that the purpose of science is to tell us about the nature of the natural world, whether you like the answer or not. You don't get to say, I don't like that answer, therefore it's not true. General public can do that. You can't do that. We can't do that. Okay, why do we care about this tension? It's easy. If we don't have a willing or a positive receptor for what we're doing, why are we doing it? So society can't benefit to the degree that it ought to be able to benefit from what we do. Public support is undermined. And of course, a new thing, I got this saying from the Japanese science minister, who one day said he was really struck that in his country, and it's true here too, people more and more feel free to say, I don't want the answer to that question. Don't ask that question. What a spooky thought from a scientist's point of view, right? Okay. So what do you do about it? Well, what we do is we always say we need to educate the public more, them poor, ignorant people who just don't get it. But if you understood what I have said before, they actually do get it. They don't like it, and they're not stuck with it. But we do need more education. And what we do about it actually has some nuance to it from my point of view. You holding up okay? I'm doing my rest for a minute. This is called breathe. He'll be done soon. Yeah. Okay. The way you approach society and communication has to do with your goal. And I mention this because I think it's important. Sometimes all you want to do is share the excitement. You know, we've made a big discovery, or we want people to like us. And therefore, regular sort of public communication is fine. We put out a press release, we have a nice article in the newspaper, Science Magazine has many of them. Alternatively, if you want to work on the tension, that traditional educational approach won't work. And it doesn't work because you can rail forever. Embryonic stem cell research is good for you. They got it. Leave them alone. They don't like it. They don't want to do it. You need a different approach. And what I'm fond of saying is you can't educate our way out of the tension because it's not just about lack of understanding. It's that they don't like it. It conflicts with their core values, and that trumps their view of the benefits. So what we have been advocating, and there's a growing movement in this country, and I'm very pleased about it, is to shift from communicating to or at the public to actually communicating with the public. It's a very scary thought if you're a scientist, because what it at its core means is listening, not our forte. We need to listen to the public about their concerns, their priorities, and questions they would like us to answer. It's a different mindset, and it's a change that's essential. The problem, of course, is that science communication is not easy. Most scientists are very bad at it. You can read as well as I. Listening and respecting public concern is hard for scientists. It's a learned skill, as is the whole thing. We actually at AAAS have a program where we train scientists to communicate science. We've had over 20 training workshops around the country at major colleges and universities, trained thousands of scientists, interestingly, mostly young scientists, who are interested in engaging with the public, want to know how to do it effectively. Older scientists, not so good. The National Academies has been involved in it as well. And I thought, now that's my favorite. You got to do better with that. Okay. I admit, it's a slightly old picture. We've learned some things from it, and those things I think are worth my last few minutes. One of the things that's most important is when you talk to the public, you have to do it in reverse of how academics tend to do it. So in academia, what we do is we like to build the case. We like to tell the story, right? And so first we build up to it, and then if you have stuck with us the whole time, boom, we'll give you the bottom line at the bottom. Well, journalists learned a long time ago, the public only wants to know the bottom line. So you have to grab their attention, then you give them a little bit of why should you care about it, and then you tell them what you wanted to tell them in the first place. Different style. They need to know about science as an enterprise. It crushes me to acknowledge that people really don't need to know the details of pituitary adrenocortical function. It is not central to everybody's life, even if it has been to mine. People need to understand what the enterprise is, what it's doing, what our limits are, and what we can do. The only thing that matters is the gist. So I just last weekend had a wonderful experience with my own board of directors. So we are going to start, we a group, are going to start a big public education campaign about climate. And the issue is, how contentious is climate change within the scientific community? Well, it actually isn't. 97% of the scientific community agrees that the Earth is warming and humans did it. Well, how do you phrase that in a way that acknowledges that 3%? So we had this fabulous, like, hour-and-a-half discussion, didn't quite get resolved, that started with, you know, many scientists agree that the Earth is warming, comma, but not everybody does, and there's a little bit of this, and still we do like debate, and we like having arguments. You know, we want to connote that we're not totally sure, right, because there's no such thing. We never cut off debate. But how do you say to the general public, the Earth is warming, humans have caused it? And you can't just say that if you're a scientist. Anyway, the only thing that matters is the gist. Framing is a big issue in public communication generally. And this one is my favorite. This is very hard for scientists to understand. You only are allowed to talk about the facts. We actually don't care about scientists' opinions about anything. And when they go to meet policymakers, it's the single biggest mistake they make. Policy is made on the basis of facts and values. We are the fact people. You have no opinion about the value part. Wait a minute, I'm a person. I have an opinion. The minute you express your opinion, or your worse, your values, you lose your credibility. And therefore, you're just a person. You are not a scientist anymore. That should inflame a few of you so we have conversation. This I stole from somebody at a meeting. I love it. Credibility is conferred by the audience, not the speaker. How am I doing? Okay. This one I also stole from somebody. Engage with, don't harangue the public. I'm doing that to you a little bit. And this one, go glocal. It's the only word you will take out of here. Glocal. It's not a speech impediment. It means to take a global issue and make it meaningful at the local or individual level. People only care about things that affect them directly or personally. Therefore, we have to find a way to make whatever the issue meaningful to the public. This is boring. Okay. I think if you were to summarize the points I've tried to make, to get through these tough times, we need to get our own house in order, try to speak on policy issues with one voice, engage the public in a real dialogue about science-society issues. Understanding is a two-way street. We always talk about public understanding of science, but what I'm saying is we need to understand the public as well. And, I love this, I didn't make this. Ready? We got to get them going in the same. Did you like that? I love that. Somebody made that for me. Thank you.
Let's thank Alan for a truly inspiring talk, and I'm sure he will spend a few minutes communicating with all of you. Alan?
Please. Yeah, you have to yell. I don't hear it very well.
I would like to hear how we can educate all students in STEM, if you wouldn't mind saying a couple of words about that.
So, okay, I promise, the short version. So what my shtick is that we have to find a way in order to make sure that America, let's take it at the national level, has a population that in fact can function and thrive in the modern world. A lot of the current discussion is around the economy, and if you just tie economy to the people, it means we have to have, for example, an educated labor force, but not a labor force of us, me's, or even a labor force of most college-educated people. The countries that are doing best are those who have a general labor force that are comfortable and familiar with science, particularly with engineering, I would argue, and with technology. So we have to have an education system that is not just geared towards more and more funneling people into science and technology careers. Many people disagree with what I'm about to say. I actually don't worry very much about the future science and technology workforce. Science is fabulous. It's exciting. It's wonderful. Many, many good students want to go into science. We don't have to early on focus so much on them. So one set of issues is, in order for people to thrive, be a part of the world and the country, we need to have everybody educated. The second point has to do with diversity. So most people think about diversity as only an equity issue. I, of course, think of it as an equity issue, but that is not enough. The country has to recognize that if you really believe that innovation is the fuel of the future, what you want is novel ideas. And with all respect to my colleagues, most novel ideas don't come from people who have been in the exact same system and the exact same set of people their whole lives. You know, people trained on pituitary adrenocortical function in the same small group of people don't often, not always, bring the best ideas. So what you have to do is educate a very broad array of people and encourage them to contribute their diverse ideas in order to get novelty, innovation, new thinking, different thinking. And this is an educational issue. I'll stop.
But how do you encourage them? Are you talking about giving prizes or?
No. I think what you have to do is a couple of things. One thing that you have to do is have an education system that doesn't start writing off the disinterested students or the less advantaged students at a very early age. That's a whole conversation we could have. And then you have to provide real-life experiences with science so that people have a sense as they're going through school of what the enterprise is. Not that it's some mystical thing that goes on for the 12 kids whose parents have, pushed them into doing summer research projects. And you have to, I think, conceptually restructure the educational system to really make sure you're doing it. Actually making that happen, I think, is extremely difficult and extremely complex. One of the nice things about my job, I pose problems. I don't come up with this. No, I don't have an easy solution to it, but it's a different mindset. And I can tell you that when I'm in various meetings, it takes literally 6 minutes. I've timed it. We all start with, and everybody agrees. Everybody says you're right. We have to teach everybody. And then it takes 6 minutes, and we're talking about the next Albert Einsteins. And so, yeah.
I could ask you 10 questions, but I'll only ask you 2. One is about the demographic issue. So it is really horrendous that the average NIH grant is awarded at
42.
age 42. So the question is, why not institute a policy they have in Europe of mandatory retirement?
You may have noticed I'm over 41, having mandatory retirement at 41.
Not 41, but 65.
So I don't want to pick the age for obvious reasons, but I do actually think, at a minimum, I would like to have the requirement that you defend your employability. That is to say that in truth, we should be creating more opportunities for younger scientists. I do think that too much of the money is going to the old guard. And there ought to be a way to start phasing that out. I don't have the easy solution. Mandatory retirement is so anathema in the United States as a concept. But I just came back from Hungary this week, and they have mandatory retirement, if it's declared by the government, at 62. Let me tell you, there are an awful lot of 62, 65-year-old people you do not want to lose from the workforce. So it's that balance issue that's so difficult. But there's got to be a point when you say, okay, you're done. Let's get the younger ones in. And I agree with that.
And well, second question, I can't decide which one is more interesting to ask. But a second question would be the issue of, so I went to a meeting in Japan a few years ago. And much to my amazement.
Do the short version, because there are other people.
And Emperor and his wife showed up. Can you imagine the President of the United States showing up at a scientific meeting in this country?
Yes, I can, because I was just there. So I have been in Washington for 30 years. It is true that I've been in the presence of the current president more times than the aggregate of all other presidents. However, 2 weeks ago, President Obama declared this new brain initiative in the presence of 200 scientists, and I've been waiting 30 years for that. And it was fabulous. It was incredible. Mostly it was incredible because it was inspirational to those scientists sitting there, and that's what happens. But presidents have come to AAAS meetings. It actually has happened. Now, do I think President Clinton sat and listened to talks? No. No, but he had a short attention span. Okay,
Maybe we
you're
should
done.
take a question at the back.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So you talk a lot about, policymakers need to, understand the scientific enterprise, and so I guess this is a question that kind of piggybacks off the retirement question. How do you encourage scientists, PhD, people who traditionally would go for the tenure track, to look at policy making as a viable alternative from the point of view of not having it be like, oh, you didn't cut it as a tenure professor, so you're going to go do some policy. How do we encourage young students and give them more opportunities to get into that line of work? And then also, how do you encourage some of these people who aren't being forced to retire to maybe just consider getting into things like that?
So those are slightly different issues. The issue of can we get the more senior people to spend more time on policy and less time competing for grants, I think, is a great idea. A real problem, and I don't have a solution to this. So I didn't get in the policy advocacy business until I had already been a tenured full professor in a university and had my bona fides, or I wouldn't have had the credibility to sit at the table. And the fact is, I was an okay, not a great scientist, but I had enough credential that I could sit at the table. And it's very important, particularly in a policy setting, that people have that set of credentials or their colleagues don't believe them. So I don't know when you want people to get involved. That's where the dilemma comes. Because if they don't get interested early in their careers, they won't do it later. Or they may not do it later, or only a few will do it later. There has to be a way that we can allow people, I think in universities, to do both. When I was an academic, if you went out and met with the public, and I've always been a ham, so I like to meet with the public and do it. And I studied aggression and, premenstrual tension and stuff. So you can imagine I got many invitations to speak to the public. But it was considered that I was wasting my time. So the system has to recognize that you can be a good scientist and do these other things at the same time. And there has to be a way to build that in. I don't know how to do it. I just know that it has to be done, or it won't happen. But it's very difficult to operate in a policy setting if you don't have core scientific credentials. Very few people can do it.
Yes, please. We'll take 2 more questions. Yes, please.
When you discuss the issue of the old scientists versus the young scientists, you suggested that the old scientists are getting
Older. Say older. It makes me feel.
I'm old, so I'm okay with this. But the issue here, you also brought up that somebody had done 3 postdocs before they were allowed to be an independent scientist, so they almost had the innovation drilled out of them by that time. I think that postdoc issue is more important than giving some part of the money to older people, because again, that's still a diversity issue, getting different ways of thinking. Getting people out of postdocs into being a scientist might be
Okay, please don't quote me as having said throw out the 65-year-olds. But I do think that people should get as much training as they need and no more. You know, there is a point when you don't need any more training. And so I share your view that taking care of the 3 postdoc problem should be a very high priority, but they have to have somewhere to go. And how to solve that, I don't really know. One thing I do believe is that every institution in the country should have a special office and a set of mentors for postdocs so they are never treated like slaves and are treated initially as trainees, and then they are brought into independence in that place where they're doing their postdoc. That would help a lot. And we all know they're different models. Sometimes they're slaves, sometimes they have independent projects. So that's a whole other discussion. Okay, last one.
Last question. Yes, please.
Hi. So when these new PhDs graduate, they need to have jobs. And in the math department on this campus, there's a third less professors than there was 20 years ago. And that's sort of a major, that is a consideration. But the big question, I guess, sort of question I have is that the National Research Council almost 2 years ago came out with a K-12 science framework, which is basically math-free. It's having lots of fun and lots of engagement, and what it's going to do is to increase the number of college freshmen who are signing up for STEM, and then they'll arrive on campus and find out that STEM is not math-free, and we'll have less college sophomores.
Thank you. I wasn't involved in the framework. I have no opinion about it. I think it's the implementation of it that's going to be difficult. My understanding was that mathematics, because math and arithmetic were part of the national effort before it to have a common core of standards, you know, for reading, language arts, and mathematics, that it was excluded from the academy process, but I wasn't a part of it, and I really don't know for sure. But I think that's why it was left out, not because the academy thinks mathematics is not good.
It thinks math is good as long as it's statistics and it doesn't do much calculation.
We'll make an exception and take one last question.
Go ahead.
Just on that, if we're talking about the next generation science standards,
He's not talking about the standards. He's talking about the framework that the academy did. The Achieve is doing the next generation.
but those are built from that framework. They are taking the Common Core and aligning all that so that it is enmeshed.
Good.
They are basically avoiding arithmetic and algebraic calculations.
Okay. Alan, you do a lot for us, and we are very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Let's all give Alan a round of applause.